What's up, everyone? Welcome to this special bonus episode of the Student Built Startups podcast. I'm your host, Cameron Stone, entrepreneur and marketing analytics student at UMD. I interview student entrepreneurs to share their stories and business strategies. Today's guest will speak about how to build a culture of equity and inclusion. He has a ton of experience from this, from working in the nonprofit sector, as well as leading student-led initiatives that work to develop equitable and inclusive spaces for students of the global majority. I encourage you to go check out his Instagram, ambitious_child_. I'm excited to introduce you all to the owner of Our Existence is Resistance, Grant E. Loveless. Hey Grant, super happy to have you here on the Student Built Startups podcast. I'm really excited to talk with you. I'll have you start off by saying hello to everyone listening and sharing one crazy but true fact about yourself.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I'm absolutely thrilled to be on this podcast today with you. One crazy but true fact is that Scooby-Doo remains to be my inspiration to this day. I still have my blanket from when I was a child, still laying around. So
That is pretty cool. So what about Scooby-Doo inspired you, I guess? Kind of curious.
for me, as just growing up, it was just when simply when they would figure out that the bad guys were the people that they would interact with, or when they would do the most craziest things to find out mysteries about their cities or different towns and stuff, that really just inspired me. Like, no matter what, y'all are gonna find the truth, expose these people, and get justice.
All right, that is cool. That's cool that you actually kind of gained something out of a cartoon like that. That's cool. So I'll have you start here with sharing a little about your educational story and including some details about your business. Our Existence is Resistance.
Absolutely. I've been at Austin Community College for 2 years. This year, I'm transferring over to Texas State University to dual major in psychology and public relations / mass communications with a digital media focus, with a minor in German. It sounds like a lot. Um, but yes, um, and with Our Existence is Resistance, I started that with the idea of making sure that Black and Brown students had a safe space at ACC. Well, not only at ACC, but in the city of Austin, and ensuring that they did have a platform to create events, programs, and initiatives. And at ACC, there was a missing piece with how can we basically help these students start off building these set things, getting them these tools, getting them these resources, getting them these connections. And my grandmother actually gave me the idea for the name. When I had asked her, when I had pitched the idea to her, she said, "So you're basically resisting, you're basically existing to resist." And that just created the momentum of Our Existence is Resistance.
All right, that's really cool. I'm really excited to talk with you about this because I think that's a really cool thing that you're doing and working on. And I think that's cool that you were able to kind of identify something that was kind of missing, and you're able to use that as an opportunity to start implementing things to help provide more opportunity and just build a community. So that's really cool. So what led you down the path of trying to improve equity and inclusion in the educational system?
I would say from since I begun in high school, I've always been one to change the system. Um, I'm a graduate of Manor High School. During my time there, I recognized that LGBTQ students at my school were not given the same opportunities as other students. And then when it did come to like the culture um, at my high school, it was really against LGBTQ students, where they're being harassed and bullied. And so I asked my principal during that time if we could create a club for our LGBTQ students. And I was given a no. And that no really changed my out on institutional power, equity, and inclusion, and ensuring that students who are underserved are getting what they deserve as far as representation, resources, and tools. So going into college with that mindset, um, I always set out a goal to recognize um, and identify what are some key issues at this college, at this university, on this campus, that are affecting students. And if students are being affected, do those students have those students made a push for change? And what does that look like? And how far has that change gone so far? So it really all started in high school.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's actually interesting because with the whole thing in high school, I'm honestly like kind of disappointed that your principals gave you a no because I'm very passionate about people should be able to be who they are 100% and not have to worry about judgment from others, and they deserve to be in a community with others like them and have like that sense of connection. And I think an organization or a club is a great way to do that. And I think that just hearing that no probably really kind of gave you some fire to go and move forward on that path. So um, yeah. So how did you start spreading your message like on this topic? What did you kind of do to start that process?
So what I did is I had to gain knowledge, and also I had to reflect on myself. As um, when I was going into college, I did have to recognize that my story is very different from other queer men of color and other Black men that I was going to be representing, or other students of color, and that I've had different opportunities in my life, and that I've had a certain amount of, I would say, privilege that many other queer and Black men didn't have. So the journey was really self-reflecting, in starting to advocate for others and recognizing like I've been given in high school and in college multiple platforms to speak my mind, to speak my truth, and to have tools and resources and connections at hand for me to create change. And I think the issue was how is it possible for me to bring other students to the table, have their student heard, to have their voices heard and amplified. Because so often do you see a lot of student leaders in the community and involved in school. So it's just like, how can we bridge that gap between our communities and our schools? Um, and for me, yeah, it was all just about self reflection and just realizing, like, for myself, I am a true vessel to, well, a connector, in a sense, to having students and community members work together, and just realizing that that's how I started, like, looking at equity and inclusion, institutional power, issues within higher education, and various other things.
Yeah. Yeah, I really liked what you said about bringing like others up and helping amplify their voice because as like an individual person there's only so much you can do with your one voice, but when you're able to bring others up and give them a platform to speak on and share their knowledge and their voice as well, that's going to lead to a really large impact. So I think that's really cool that you kind of had that mindset. So how have you used past failures to help you have greater success as you move forward?
Oh, it's extremely hard. I would say even as a student, it's really hard because you always want to ensure that when you're succeeding academically or you're succeeding professionally, that there's always going to be a balance. Um, and just to dive off a little bit, there's always this societal stigma that we have to be perfect. And even on social media, that we have to have the perfect balance of our academics and our professional life. But in reality, there's been various projects and various initiatives that failed, that or projects that I've been a part of that have failed. And the biggest takeaway from those is like, how do we pick up these pieces and actually continue to push for justice, truth, and change. Because a lot of times, in my experience working with other student leaders, when something fails, it doesn't get picked back up. We just move on to another key issue, or we just say, okay, let's sit that on a table. We could come back to it next year, or in a good year or two. Um, and so with failure is extremely hard, but the beauty in it is just seeing like what did I learn from it? How can I take this failure and use it as a win? Because even if you do fail, there's always going to be a little light in it.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's one thing that I'm very passionate about is that when you do fail, you have to like kind of you have to accept your failure and understand that like maybe why you failed and kind of just live in that moment. But once you kind of get past that moment of failure, you're able to kind of try and find the light in the failure. And I think that's a really important part because then you can try to leverage that in the future to help you do better next time at whatever
Mhm.
you're trying to do.
Absolutely.
So what is, if there was one thing that you wish you would have known before you started this journey, what would that one thing be?
Mhm. So many. I would say my first. I would say like my first thing was learning the importance of collaboration earlier, learning it very, very earlier on. Because when I first started in high school and even going into college my first year, I was very focused on if I'm doing something, I have to do it myself. And not recognizing uh, there were various other student leaders at UT Austin, Houston Tillotson, Concordia, St. Edwards, the Art Institute of Austin, South. There was other student leaders doing similar work. And I was blind to it because I was like, you know what? I'm gonna do this by myself. I'm gonna change the system by myself. I was feeling myself. Um, and that's one thing that I wish I would have known earlier on is that collaboration and that your community is key. Because when you do walk into a room with the board of trustees or you have a meeting about creating some sustainable change on your campus, on your university, or in your city, you always want to make sure that you have your communities behind you, and that you're not alone. Because what I've learned also in my journey and still on my journey is that when you speak your truth, sometimes it does feel like you're alone, but there's someone out there who can relate to what you're going through. And even if it's one person to a million people, as long as your voice is being heard and amplified, then you're always going to have someone to back you up.
Absolutely. I really like that a lot, what you just said there, because there's like 8 billion people on this earth. And the odds of somebody else the odds that there's not someone else out there that kind of has the same mindset that you do, or they believe in the same thing you do, or that they kind of agree with your truth is
Hmm.
almost like minuscule. There's almost no chance that that's even possible. So I really like that you have that mindset because you don't need to impact everybody on this earth. You just need to impact some of the people on this earth to make a big change.
Exactly. And you know what? And that is actually what matters because I was just telling my friend the other day, you don't have to have 20,000 followers on Instagram or Twitter to create an impact in the world because some student activists that I know that are phenomenal don't even have social media and they still create impacts on their college campuses. Um, I just believe in that if you have the right community and the right people on your team and that you believe in collaboration in what you're doing with the passion and that you're invested, that you're going to strive no matter what.
Yeah, absolutely. For sure. So based on what you're doing right now, what gives you the most fulfillment, or what do you enjoy the most?
What I love the most is hearing What I love the most is seeing students, faculty, and staff come together. I would say that's the most rewarding feeling in the world. Or hearing students tell me about what projects or initiative or ideas they have. Truly, I'm once I was doing an event with Houston Tillotson University last year, called the Seat at the Table, where I collaborated with my colleague Juan Zuniga, in the Religious Life and Campus Ministry Department. And basically, we had a conference where we brought together universities across the Austin metropolitan area to discuss various topics about LGBTQ issues, equity and inclusion, sustainability, various topics about student life. And one student in particular came up to me and said, I have an idea. I want to do this on my campus at St. Edward's University. And even at ACC, being a part of their Black Student Success Committee and having some students come up to me and say, you know what? I have this crazy idea that's not crazy, but it seems crazy. And it may look crazy, but it's not crazy. Um, and just hearing that students are passionate, and that they want to get involved and they want to be in their community doing something, or they want to jump into planning and programming mode, to tackle on an issue on their campus is the most fulfilling thing, I would say, I get out of doing my work.
Awesome. I could see how that would be just absolutely just completely fulfilling. I could totally see it. Um, so when you were first starting down this journey, what was your biggest fear and kind of what did you do to overcome that fear?
To be honest, my biggest fear was actually failure. Um, And that kind of go back to the question about how do I use my failures as successes? Because I've always been the type to where if I put in my energy, my passion, and my time, like I invest in something, I want to make sure that it comes to fulfillment. I mean, fruition, and that I'm able to achieve. And failing is very fearful to me, because I feel like if I failed, then I failed my community, or I failed the group of people that I was working with. Or if I'm on a project and we fail as a collective, I feel like I took the biggest, like I dropped the ball. And how I overcame that is just by noticing that my failures are successes. That because I took the initiative, or that I and my colleagues took an initiative to do something, and we got recognized for it, even though it failed, there's still room for us to pick up and keep the momentum going. And that even though failure may be present now, that doesn't determine where our project or initiative or program is going to be in a year, in 3 years, in 5 years, in 10 years. Because some of the world's greatest leaders had to have failed. For example, the author of Harry Potter had what, over 100 to 200 refusals to like get her book published. But it took that one person that believed in them to say, you know what, this is amazing. We're gonna do it. And now she's a best-selling author. So it just goes to show, like, even though failure may be present, that doesn't really determine the success of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Two things that I really liked that you said during that was you mentioned like even when you're like if you're working on a team, even if your team fails as something, you still like take responsibility for that. And I think that for anybody who's leading, that taking responsibility for your failures is one like something that a lot of leaders do. They always feel like the weight is kind of on their shoulders. I think it's just a trait of
Mhm.
leaders. And I think that it's also an important thing to do as a leader because then you can truly like learn from that. Um, and the other thing that I liked was the Harry Potter thing. I think that's really interesting that you mentioned that because you don't have to win every single time. Sometimes all it takes is just that 1% to get it right and make that difference 1% of the time, and that'll have
Mhm.
more impact than anything you've done in the past.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, and you never know which one it's going to be. It might be what you're working on now. It might be 5 years from now. But the only way to know is to just keep pushing forward.
Absolutely. And I would say, like, with any fear that anyone has, if you want to overcome it, you have to do self-reflection. Because that's why I really think it's about self-reflection, because that leads to healing. And with that healing comes growth and progress. And so for me, recognizing like, okay, I don't like to fail. That doesn't mean, as I said before, that I won't succeed. So yeah, I would say to get on that journey of overcoming any fear to success, you always have to do a self-reflection and healing.
Yeah, yeah, I like that. So you're obviously very passionate about building a culture of inclusion and equity. So what are some? We're going to talk a little bit about like what you can do to like make that happen. So let's kind of like start off by describing like the definition, like maybe a textbook definition of like what equity and inclusion is, and maybe like how that can apply to a business setting.
Absolutely. Equity refers to the proportional representation by race, class, gender, etc. um, in opportunity. And just to give like a brief classroom session, equity and equality are used interchangeably, however they differ in important ways. Equality is typically defined as treating everyone the same and giving everyone access to the same opportunities. Meanwhile, as I said before, equity refers to proportional representation in those same opportunities. And to achieve equity in a business setting, when you look at policies and procedures may result in unequal distribution of resources. Um, so, for example, how are we making sure that co-workers of color are getting paid the same as non-persons of color? How can we make sure that men are women are getting equal pay as men, and those type of things. So, although some things may be unequal, um, yeah. So, equity and inclusion is just that.
All right, thanks for sharing that. I appreciate that, and I'm sure that you just taught something new to someone listening right now. So that's awesome. Now, what are like some of the key benefits of having like an inclusive culture in a business setting or an organization setting?
I would definitely say that everyone is represented. Everyone's voices are heard and recognized, and that all ideas are brought to the table. Because sometimes when you do have groups or organizations or businesses that are exclusive and inequitable, some may use the mask of diversity to say that they have a great number of Black or Brown employees, but really behind diversity is racism. And not a lot of times do people acknowledge that. So when you do have an equitable and inclusive space, not only do you dismantle the structures of racism, but you also invite in um, people's identities. And I think that's the most beautiful thing about equity and inclusion, that people get to express their identities, and that you can be comfortable as an LGBTQ person, you can be comfortable as a person of color, and you can be comfortable from what you identify as, whether it's non-binary, male or female, queer, whatever the case may be, because those inclusive and equitable spaces make room for you to feel celebrated, make room for you to feel noticed and recognized, which is really needed to keep employees and people in leadership positions thriving, um, and feel supported. Because I know for me, for example, I don't want to go to a job and I don't feel like my voice is being represented, and that when we're having meetings, that my vision, my expertise, and that what I've experienced within my identity is not being seen or heard, or that I'm not supported in my endeavors within the business, or nonprofit. So yeah.
Yeah, I really liked what you said there, and especially when you're talking about bringing like inclusion and equity into like a workspace. I think that when you do that, like you said, people are able to bring their whole self to work and be comfortable with who they are there, and therefore they're able to put in like 100% of what value they can bring, and they're able to have more of an impact on the business or company or whatever organization that they're working for.
Mm-hmm.
So what are some things that like a business owner or maybe like a CEO that they could do to help promote equity and inclusion within the workspace?
I would say first you would have to do I would say do an audit of your organization. Ask your employees, do they feel like there is equity and inclusion, or implement a workshop to teach them about what equity and inclusion looks like, and then ask them, does our organization, does our business or organization represent this? If you get a yes, that's amazing, you're doing a great job. If you get a no, then this podcast episode is just for you. um, so I would say, of course, I just go back to collaboration because with an organization I work with Measure Austin, the vice president Precious Azare, she instills in me the key of collaboration. And that as a business or a nonprofit, if you are lacking in areas of equity and inclusion, it's not too late to start fixing those issues and bridging those gaps. Just look for organizations that can teach those workshops and sessions that can help you identify the areas where you're lacking, and also start collaborating with organizations that are equitable and inclusive, and start reflecting how their culture and their structures have been promoting and supporting their employees, and how you can do the same. And too often, with I mean, not too often, but sometimes with some organizations, they can be prideful. Um, and it's good to recognize that, because some organizations may say, you know what, my employees may have said that, but I know for a fact I started this organization. I know for a fact we good. And so it's all about breaking that barrier and having those dialogues about inviting in those equitable and inclusive components.
Yeah, I mean, you gave some really great like actionable insights during that last section there. I mean, there's definitely some stuff that people can take away and go and actually start using what you just said. So that's really cool about that. Um, so what would you say are like the three most important parts of building an inclusive culture?
I would say one, collaboration. Um, Two, transparency. I feel like transparency is definitely important, because you want to make sure your leadership team is not only transparent with its employees or the volunteers or whoever is part of the nonprofit organization, but making sure that there is conversation, there is transparency, and that there's either quarterly or yearly reports about the state of equity and inclusion within or outside of your business. And I would say for three, support. I would definitely say support. Support and acknowledgement are I would combine those two to number
All
three.
right.
Because it's good to acknowledge um your team or the people that you work with on a leadership or volunteer team, and be able to be there to support them, because sometimes we do there are organizations, nonprofits, and businesses that are inequitable and exclusive, and there may be only two or three black and brown employees that recognize this issue, that that are that can't really move and shake, and implement a workshop about equity and inclusion. And it's really nerve wracking to actually go up to your boss, who may be a non-person of color, and say, you know what, this is inequitable and inclusive, because you may be in jeopardy of losing your job. So not only is your professional life at risk, but you don't know where your career may lie in 3, 5 years to you talking about it. And you know what? That goes back again to failure. Sometimes we, as Black and Brown people, or persons of color, um, we do get stuck in situations where we do recognize an issue, but the authority figures are predominantly non-persons of color. So having those conversations and finding pathways to implement equity inclusion can be difficult.
Yeah, I what you just said kind of like really just kind of resonated with me. The whole like the kind of the story of like if somebody went to their superior and tried to tell them that their like organization is not inclusive and not equitable, that like heck they're in jeopardy of losing their job from that potentially. And I I think that like for every situation it'll be different, but if your organization like isn't willing to like implement changes, like it might be even like best for your long-term happiness to even take the risk. And if you end up losing your job, you might be happier or more fulfilled or more comfortable somewhere else, working elsewhere, even if it means you're maybe making a little bit less money. Now, I know it really depends on your situation. If you have family, kids, that kind of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and that sort of stuff. But I mean, if you were talking happiness, that may be a failure might turn into a positive in that sense.
Absolutely. And also looking at it from the lens of a student. Let's say a student had an internship, and they were the only person of color on the team. That is, or one of the few persons of color on the team. Looking at it from a student perspective, how do we tell our boss or someone that we're interning for or working for, hey, I'm a student. I see this. This is an issue. Because not only is our professional life on the line, but also our academics. But you know what? I really want to go back to how you have to overcome that fear. And you have to make sure that your voice is heard, is amplified, and that's recognized. And sometimes you gotta take a risk. Because I'm all about taking risks. If you see something and it doesn't sit right within your soul, and you can't sleep at night, and you feel like you're looking crazy, um, it's always good to like just take the risk and say, you know what, I'm gonna stand up because you don't know who else in your space, in that room, at your job, internship, fellowship, whatever the case may be feeling the same way, but isn't able to speak their mind. And so that really kind of goes back again to what we were talking about, why I'm so passionate because your voice can be the voice of many, simply.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I really liked what you said there. Um, so this one is it's not a very straightforward question. I don't know. But is an inclusive culture relevant to internal aspects of a business or organization only, or does it apply to like external aspects as well?
I would definitely say internal and external, because you want to make sure there's a balance. Because you don't want to have the internal aspects of your organization or business inclusive and equitable, but when it's time to leave the office or when you're doing outreach or branding, that is not equitable and inclusive. Because with either or, it's both going to be reflective on your team. Because externally, if I am a community organizer and I see that, yes, you do have a beautiful, inclusive and equitable team, but then your branding, packaging, or your outreach methods is very exclusive and what to call it, inequitable. Then it's like, what's going on here? And I hate to use this term, but you don't want to be wishy washy, with your organization. You do not want to be wishy-washy at all. You want to make sure that you dot your I's and cross your T's. You don't want to be out here looking crazy, and confusing people with your mission, your vision, and the values that you and your organization or business have. Because for me, it's like if I see that an organization is being wishy-washy, then I immediately start asking questions. And then if it doesn't sit right with my soul, it's time to like say goodbye to that organization. So organizations and businesses need to, do the audit and make sure that the inside and outside our organization uh, is inclusive and equitable. And of course, no organization and business is perfect. None. There's really no organization or business that is perfect. We all have our different structures, ways of organizing and such. But to have the capability to ensure that there is equity and inclusion should always be on the top of all business and organizations' priority list.
Yeah, I mean, you don't be wishy-washy is like literally the the key takeaway there, I think.
Don't be wishy-washy. Yes.
Yep. um so we're going to move on to the Fast Five section now. I'll ask you 5 quick questions and we will just move on through those. So, what is the most valuable learning experience that you have had?
The most valuable learning experience I had is oh, this is a great question. Okay, so growing up with my of course my parents. So my mom, she is an educator, and my dad, he's a bishop um of a non-denominational church. So one valuable lesson I had was growing up in the church, actually, and learning like the aspects of community and family, and being able to invest in my community. Specifically speaking, I did everything in the church because my dad was a pastor. So you would see me serving food, you would see me being an usher, you would see me dancing. I would even be in a choir. Okay, I can't sing. It makes no sense, but it taught me the value of work ethic and the importance of not only showing up, being a part of the process for inviting community in. So I'd say definitely with church, with my dad and mother raising me in the church, that would be one of the most valuable learning experiences I've had.
Awesome. I can totally see how that would instill like that sense of community and kind of work ethic into you based on what you just told me. So I think that's awesome. So what is one book that you would recommend? And now it might be Harry Potter. I don't know, but you mentioned it earlier. But
Okay. um, one book I would recommend is James Baldwin's book, Go Tell It on the Mountain. For those for those who don't know who James Baldwin is one of my biggest idols. He was one of the 20th century's greatest writers because he was an Afro queer man during a time where being gay and black was not even a thing. And just he broke a new ground with the exploration of like racial and social issues in as many words. And Go Tell It on a Mountain intersects his journey as a gay black as an Afro queer man and the struggles and challenges he went through. And it's a beautiful book. I would recommend to anyone getting involved into social justice work or community work because it helps you understand racial and ethnic disparities, as well as teaches you how to even find your own identity because that journey is very long, very very long.
yeah, I can imagine. And I think that that book might be a great example of how you mentioned that one voice can maybe be the voice of many others. So I think that might be a good example of that. Um, Now, what is one business or organizational tool that you would recommend?
I would say Instagram. Actually, this is a good question because I'm known as a public figure, so I'm really on all social medias. I mean, I still have a MySpace. That makes no sense. Um, so I would say Instagram or Facebook. I say Instagram because it's very easy to look up hashtags and look at um, anything you want to. If you're interested in fashion design, hashtag fashion design. You can find fashion designers all over the country. Same with CEOs, data scientists, anything you want to be, you can search it up as a hashtag on Instagram and connect with people from all over the world. I connected last year. I actually connected with a lawyer all the way in Australia, and I'm in America. I mean, come on now. I didn't even have to leave my home. So I would say definitely Instagram, and it has great marketing tools. Facebook because they're creating ads and stuff on Facebook, and it's easier in my opinion to promote your brand on Facebook because you get to connect to different groups. And I'll say that's a key difference between Instagram and Facebook for me. Facebook, I love it because you can utilize it for like getting involved in like different groups and stuff. And then Instagram, you can connect with anybody around the world simply by using a hashtag. So I mean, either one is great.
Yeah, yeah. No, I like both of those for both of their different kind of features as well because like my first 10 episodes or 20, actually 20 episodes, I think I found majority of my guests through Instagram just searching hashtags, which you really can connect with people very precisely and all over the world, like you said. Um, and I'm kind of curious, are you on TikTok at all?
See, look, I made a TikTok with my best friend. And so yes, I am on TikTok.
All right, cool, cool, cool. All right. So what do you do to like schedule your time and plan things out ahead in the future?
So I'm be so honest with you, I'm not the best person to ask about time management. Um, but I can tell you, I always write things down. Or I have my Google Calendar, or I use the project management tool with the different organizations and businesses that I'm involved with. Asana, which is phenomenal.
Yeah.
And so with Asana, oh, I'm sorry.
No, no, you're good. You're good. I think go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say like with Asana, Google Calendar, and my own personal notebook that I carry because I promise to you, I have like hundreds of notebooks with different things. Because every single month I get a new notebook. So yeah. So that's how I really keep up with everything. And how I plan ahead, I just think about I think about it per semester with my student mindset. And I ask myself, going into the fall semester from August to December, what will I be doing? How do I want to do it? And setting those goals for myself per semester. And saying like, if there's an application open for a fellowship in the summer that's gonna start in the fall, do I have the capacity to do it? Which is one, do I have the capacity? Two, how would this serve as an investment towards my future? And then three, if I do it, can I put in my full focus, my time and my passion to making sure I do the best I can?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I liked what you said there about like looking forward as a student to kind of see what you can actually fit in your schedule in the future. I really like that. And I think that I like this question a lot. And I think I like it so much because everybody kind of plans and schedules so much differently because we're
Hmm.
all different personalities and we all just operate differently. But I feel like everyone still has a certain way that they go about it, whether that's writing lists daily or if it's planning out your next 6 months. But I think it's just interesting to hear how other people's go about planning and scheduling what they have going on. And our last question here is what is the number one thing that drives your motivation?
Oh, that's a good question because that's like I have like 100 things. Uh, but number one is that I'm not alone. Um, and that goes back to the very things I was talking about having a support system in your businesses and organizations, and having that peer-to-peer support as a student. But if I didn't bring that up before, now I'm gonna say it. You need to have that peer-to-peer support as a student, to ensure that whatever you're starting up or whatever organization or project or program that you're spearheading, you do have support. Because for me, in my journey, as I said before, I was just doing it by myself because I was like, you know what? I can do it all by myself. I got it. But I recognize there's student leaders like Malik Julian, like Maya Patel, like Juan Zuniga, like a whole bunch of student activists in the city of around the Austin metropolitan area, um, that truly have supported me, that truly love me, that I've collaborated with, and that continuously show their support. Especially as I said before, when I drop the ball or when I fail or if I get nominated for something and I don't win, or if I apply to something and I don't get it, that feeling of failure is just alleviated by the amount of support and love that I have. So yeah, that's my number one motivation will be the student community and just continue seeing student leaders popping out the woodwork. Because it's really beautiful. Like the other day, I was on Facebook and I saw this student leader who I've met in the past before. His name is Xavier Fenceroy, and I had no idea there was a student activist until yesterday. And it was so crazy. I was like, oh, okay, I see you. I see you. I see you.
That's cool. So Grant, you gave some great information about how to build a culture of inclusion, and you shared your awesome story. I really enjoyed everything that you talked about. But before we wrap up, I'll ask you to provide one main takeaway that you want everyone listening right now to kind of remember as they move forward.
I would say one takeaway I want anyone and everyone to take away is be the change that you want to see. And also, if you see an issue, if you see or identify like disparities or inequities, or feel that your business or someone's business, nonprofit organization, or whatever the case may be, is exclusive, and is not acknowledging or supporting people from different identities, be the person that speaks up, because you don't know how many people you'll be helping. And sometimes, and it's always best to be that change, to be that catalyst that uh that pushes and brings that momentum of truth and justice and change. So if I could tell anyone, take away anything from this podcast, is one, don't be wishy washy. And two, be the change that you want to see, and implement the change that you want to see, in an organization, nonprofit, and create a space for yourself. And if there's no organization or business that can provide that space, oh yeah, take the mantle and create your own space. So yeah, that's what I would definitely say. Yes.
Awesome. That's a great main takeaway there. And last thing, where can we find more about you and what you're doing with your organization?
Really, you know what? I don't want to be one of them people that be bragging about themselves, but you can Google me. Um, but you can really just Google Grant E. Loveless and find me anywhere. I'm on LinkedIn, Grant E. Loveless. I'm on Twitter, and I'm on Twitter. It's ambitious child underscore. And then I'm on Instagram, ambitious underscore child underscore. See, I have to make sure that I have like one set name for everything, just for this very reason. Uh,
I'll put all the links. I'll put all the links in the show notes. So we got it all set. So no worries about that.
but yes. And of course, anyone hearing this, please reach out to me if you need help from anywhere in the world. If you need help implementing something with equity and inclusion on your campuses, in your businesses and organizations.
All right. Thanks for putting that offer out there for people to reach out to you as well. I appreciate that.
Yes.
I really enjoyed talking with you today.
Me too. Thank you so much for in having me on your podcast. I'm extremely honored and thrilled.
I'm really glad that I was able to share Grant's story with you guys. Thanks again for being on the show, Grant. And I'm also really glad that I was able to get this content out there at a time that is so relevant and time sensitive. So thank you, Grant, for working with me to make that happen. And I really hope that you were able to gain some broader understanding or some actionable insights from this episode and from everything that Grant spoke about today. And of course, thank you for listening to this episode. I truly appreciate your support on this journey. And make sure to hit that subscribe button, leave a rating and a review, and make sure to share this episode with a friend if you think that they would benefit from that. Lastly, I encourage you to go check out studentbuiltstartups.com to find the show notes to this episode, as well as the links to everything that we talked about. Thanks again, and I will catch you on the next episode.